The words hit me like a slap across the face at my own sister's engagement party. You're honestly pathetic, Catalina. Still living in that cramped studio apartment, still working your little entry-level job while the rest of us are actually building something. Blake Morrison, my sister Jasmine's fiancé, said it loud enough for half the party to hear, his expensive whiskey breath hot against my ear as I stood frozen by the dessert table in the Riverside Country Club's main ballroom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had been reaching for a piece of the 3-tier vanilla cake when he cornered me. The same cake I'd helped Jasmine pick out at Romano's bakery just 2 weeks earlier, listening to her gush about her perfect life, her perfect fiancé, her perfect future in their perfect suburban home in Maplewood Heights. The same cake that now felt like cardboard in my mouth as his words sank in. I mean, look around, Blake continued, gesturing with his crystal tumbler toward the elegant crowd of Jasmine's friends and colleagues. Everyone here is somebody. Corporate executives, business owners, people who matter. And then there's you. He laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't meant to be funny. 28 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A community college degree and a reception desk at some no-name consulting firm nobody's ever heard of? The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was the way he said them. Casual, matter-of-fact. Like my entire existence was so insignificant that insulting me required no more effort than ordering his morning coffee. The second worst part was that some of what he said was true, at least on the surface. I was 28. I did live in a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's nail salon on Oakwood Avenue, where the walls were so thin I could hear every conversation from the street below. I did work reception at Hartwell & Associates, a small business consulting firm tucked away on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse in the old industrial district of Riverside. My desk was right by the front door, greeting clients with the same scripted smile and "Good morning, how can I help you?" that I'd perfected over the past 3 years. But what Blake Morrison didn't know, what nobody at that party knew, was what had really brought me to that reception desk. It wasn't failure or lack of ambition, it was strategy. 3 years ago, I'd graduated summa cum laude from Riverside Community College with a degree in business administration. Not because I couldn't get into a 4-year university, but because I'd calculated every move. While my classmates were accumulating debt at private colleges, I was earning my degree debt-free and gaining real-world experience. While they were studying theoretical business models, I was watching actual businesses rise and fall from the front lines. Hartwell & Associates wasn't just some no-name consulting firm. It was a boutique operation that specialized in corporate restructuring and executive placement, the kind of firm that worked quietly behind the scenes when major companies needed to make changes they couldn't announce publicly. The kind of firm that placed high-level executives in positions across the city's biggest corporations. And I wasn't just answering phones and scheduling appointments. For 3 years, I'd been absorbing everything. Every client meeting I'd scheduled, I'd made note of the companies involved. Every executive who walked through our doors, I'd researched their backgrounds and career trajectories. Every restructuring project our consultants handled, I'd quietly studied the strategies and outcomes. I'd turned my reception desk into a masterclass in corporate intelligence. But Blake Morrison, with his MBA from Westfield State and his middle management position at Sterling Industries, saw only the surface. He saw the girl who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic while he cruised around in his leased BMW. He saw the girl who shopped at Target while his fiancé, my sister, modeled her engagement ring that probably cost more than my annual rent. Catalina's just figuring things out, Jasmine had said weakly, appearing beside us with a forced smile. She looked beautiful in her champagne-colored dress, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But I could see the embarrassment in her eyes, the way she glanced around to see if anyone else had overheard. Figuring things out? Blake scoffed. She's almost 30, Jazz. When exactly is this grand plan supposed to kick in? He turned back to me, his pale blue eyes cold and assessing. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to face reality. Some people are meant for bigger things, and some people... He shrugged, the gesture saying everything his words left hanging. The thing about being underestimated is that people tell you things they shouldn't. They let you overhear conversations you weren't meant to hear. They assume you're not smart enough, not important enough, not connected enough to matter. For 3 years, I'd been the invisible woman behind the reception desk, and invisible women hear everything. I knew that Blake's position at Sterling Industries was shaky. I knew his department was underperforming, and that rumors of restructuring had been circulating for months. I knew because Sterling Industries was one of Hartwell and Associates' biggest clients, and I'd been sitting outside the conference room during every meeting about their corporate reorganization. But standing there in that ballroom, surrounded by the soft jazz and elegant chatter of Jasmine's engagement party, I didn't say any of that. I didn't defend myself or fire back with what I knew. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do best over the past 3 years. I watched. I listened, I smiled politely and excused myself to the bathroom, where I stood in front of the mirror and made a decision that would change everything. Some people think revenge is about anger, about getting even in the moment, but real power comes from patience. It comes from knowing exactly when to reveal what you know and how to use it. And after 3 years of preparation I didn't even know I was doing, I was finally ready to stop being invisible. The engagement party continued around me, but I was no longer thinking about cake or congratulations or fake smiles. I was thinking about Monday morning and the phone call I was going to make to Mr. Hartwell, the one that would set everything in motion. Blake Morrison had called me pathetic for the last time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Monday morning came with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. I arrived at Hartwell and Associates 30 minutes early, as I had every day for the past 3 years, and settled into my reception desk with a cup of coffee from the deli downstairs. The familiar routine felt different somehow, charged with an energy I hadn't felt before. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I knocked on Mr. Hartwell's office door. James Hartwell was a man in his late 50s who had built his consulting firm from nothing, and he had always treated me with more respect than most people in positions of power. He looked up from his morning briefing papers, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, and smiled. "Catalina, good morning. What can I do for you?" I sat down in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, the same chair where I'd watched dozens of executives discuss million-dollar deals and career-changing decisions. But this time, I wasn't just the invisible woman taking notes or scheduling follow-ups. "Mr. Hartwell, I have a request that might sound unusual, but I think it could benefit both of us." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I've been thinking about my career development, and I was wondering if you'd consider giving me more responsibility with the Sterling Industries account." He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "The Sterling account, that's one of our most complex restructuring projects, Catalina. What exactly did you have in mind?" "I know you've been handling their middle management evaluation personally, and I also know how valuable your time is. I was thinking I could assist with some of the preliminary research and candidate assessments. I've been absorbing information about their company structure for months now, and I believe I could add value to the process." It wasn't entirely untrue. For the past 6 months, I had been compiling detailed notes on Sterling Industries' organization chart, performance metrics, and personnel files. What I didn't mention was that my interest had become particularly focused once I learned Blake Morrison worked there. Mr. Hartwell studied me for a moment. "You know, Catalina, I've been impressed with your initiative lately, the way you've been handling client relations, your attention to detail. I've actually been considering bringing you into more strategic work." He paused, tapping his pen against his desk. But the Sterling project is sensitive. They're looking at significant changes in their management structure. It requires discretion and a deep understanding of corporate dynamics. I understand completely, I replied. I've been observing how you handle these situations for 3 years, and I've learned more about business strategy from watching you work than I ever did in college. I think I'm ready for this kind of responsibility. Mr. Hartwell opened the folder, and his eyebrows rose slightly. Inside were detailed charts showing productivity trends, team performance indicators, and cost-benefit analyses for each department. But more importantly, there was a comprehensive breakdown of the Marketing Development Division, Blake Morrison's department, showing a consistent decline in ROI, missed targets, and budget overruns spanning the last 18 months. "This is surprisingly thorough," he said, flipping through the pages. "Where did you get all this data?" "Public quarterly reports, industry benchmarks, and information that's come through our office during regular business dealings," I replied carefully. "Everything here is legitimate and already available to us as their consulting firm. I just organized it in a way that tells the story more clearly." What I didn't say was that I'd spent my weekend cross-referencing every piece of Sterling Industries information I'd encountered over the past year. Every casual comment Blake had made at family dinners about his work, every overheard phone conversation when he had visited the office to pick up Jasmine, every detail I'd absorbed and filed away without even realizing I was doing it. "Catalina, this kind of analysis, this is the work of someone with significant business intelligence skills." Mr. Hartwell looked up at me with something that might have been surprise. "How long have you been capable of this level of strategic thinking?" "Honestly, I think I've been developing these skills gradually just by being here, but I've never had the opportunity to apply them formally." I leaned forward slightly. "I know I'm asking for a big step up from reception work, but I think I've earned the chance to prove myself with more substantial responsibilities." He was quiet for a long moment, studying both the analysis and me. "The Sterling account is particularly delicate right now. They're looking at restructuring their entire middle management tier, which could affect dozens of positions. The recommendations we make will determine people's careers, their livelihoods. I understand the weight of that responsibility, and I think that's exactly why this work matters so much. People deserve to be evaluated fairly based on actual performance and potential, not just politics or personal connections." Mr. Hartwell nodded slowly. "There's a board meeting at Sterling Industries this Thursday where we'll be presenting our preliminary findings and recommendations. If I bring you onto this project officially, you'd need to be prepared to stand behind your analysis. Are you confident in these numbers?" My heart rate picked up, but I kept my voice level. "Completely confident. I can provide backup documentation for every data point in that report." "All right then." He closed the folder and looked at me directly. "I'm promoting you to Junior Business Analyst effective immediately. Your first major assignment will be co-leading the Sterling Industries Management Assessment. Your salary will reflect the new position, of course." I felt a flush of genuine satisfaction that had nothing to do with Blake Morrison. This was something I'd earned, something I'd worked toward even when I didn't fully realize it. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. I won't let you down." "I don't think you will. In fact, I have a feeling you're going to surprise a lot of people." As I walked back to my desk, which would soon be replaced by an actual office, I felt the first piece of my plan clicking into place. I hadn't asked for anything unreasonable or unethical. I had simply requested an opportunity to use skills I developed and knowledge I'd legitimately acquired. The fact that Blake Morrison was about to discover exactly how much I'd been paying attention was just a bonus. Thursday's meeting was going to be very interesting indeed. Thursday arrived faster than I expected, and I found myself sitting in the Sterling Industries boardroom at 2 p.m. sharp, wearing my best navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio that Mr. Hartwell had given me that morning. The conference room was all glass and chrome, overlooking downtown Riverside's financial district, with a massive oval table that could seat 20 people. Around that table sat Sterling's executive team. CEO Patricia Vance, a sharp woman in her early 60s with silver hair and an intimidating presence.
CFO Robert Chen, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, and several department heads, including Director of Operations Sarah Martinez. At the far end of the table, looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit, sat Blake Morrison. I had positioned myself strategically next to Mr. Hartwell, my analysis reports neatly organized in front of me. Blake's eyes had widened when he first saw me walk in, and I'd watched his expression shift from confusion to something that looked almost like panic. He'd been whispering urgently with his immediate supervisor, Tom Bradley, ever since the meeting began.
As you can see from our preliminary assessment, Mr. Hartwell was saying, gesturing to the presentation screen, there are several areas where Sterling Industries could optimize performance through strategic personnel adjustments. My colleague, Catalina Reyes, has conducted an extensive analysis of departmental efficiency metrics. I stood to present my findings, my voice steady despite the weight of Blake's stare boring into me. Our data shows significant variance in ROI across departments, with some areas consistently exceeding targets, while others have shown declining performance over the past 18 months. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed a color-coded chart of departmental performance. Green sections represented high-performing areas, yellow indicated moderate performance, and red highlighted divisions that were underperforming. Blake's marketing development department was prominently featured in red. Miss Reyes, CEO Vance interrupted, her voice crisp and professional. Can you elaborate on the methodology behind these assessments? I want to ensure we're making decisions based on solid data, not assumptions. Absolutely, I replied, feeling more confident with each word. We analyzed quarterly reports dating back 2 years, cross-referenced budget allocations with actual deliverables, and compared performance metrics against industry standards for similar-sized operations. I walked them through each data point, explaining how I'd calculated efficiency ratios and identified patterns in productivity decline. The room was silent, except for the occasional scratch of pens on paper as executives took notes. Blake's face had gone pale, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. When I finished the presentation, there was a moment of heavy silence before Tom Bradley, Blake's supervisor, cleared his throat. Miss Reyes, these numbers, they're quite damning for some of our teams. Are you certain about the accuracy of this data regarding the marketing development division? I am, I replied firmly. In fact, I can provide additional documentation that shows the pattern extends beyond just numbers. There are indicators of systemic issues, including missed deadlines, budget overruns, and client satisfaction rates that have been trending upward. That's when Blake finally spoke up, his voice louder than it needed to be in the quiet room. I'm sorry, but who exactly is this person? I mean, no offense, but aren't you the receptionist from Hartwell's office? What qualifications do you have to be making these kinds of assessments about my department? The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward Blake, and I could feel the temperature drop several degrees. CEO Vance's expression shifted from professional interest to something much colder. Mr. Morrison, she said slowly, Miss Reyes is here as a representative of our consulting firm, presenting data that we requested. Her qualifications are not your concern. But Blake was digging himself deeper, his panic apparently overriding his common sense. I just think we should consider the source here. I mean, she was literally answering phones last week. Now she's trying to tell us how to run our business. It seems like maybe this analysis might be biased or incomplete. Mr. Hartwell's jaw tightened visibly. Mr. Morrison, I can assure you that Miss Reyes's analysis has been thoroughly vetted. She's a valued member of our team with demonstrated expertise in business intelligence. Look, I'm sure she's a nice girl, but let's be realistic here. This is my livelihood we're talking about, my career. And you're going to let some girl with a community college degree tell you that I'm not doing my job? The silence that followed was deafening. I could see CFO Chen actually wince at Blake's words. Sarah Martinez was staring at him like he'd just set himself on fire.
Even Tom Bradley looked mortified, probably realizing that his employee had just insulted the consulting firm in front of the entire executive team. CEO Vance spoke first, her voice ice cold. "Mr. Morrison, your comments are inappropriate and unprofessional. You will apologize to Miss Reyes immediately." Blake's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I'm not apologizing for asking legitimate questions about credentials. If someone is going to recommend that people lose their jobs, shouldn't we know if they're qualified to make that judgment? I'm just saying maybe we should get a second opinion from someone with actual business experience." I felt something shift in the room's energy. What had started as an uncomfortable moment was now becoming a full-scale disaster for Blake. Mr. Hartwell looked furious, and I could see several executives exchanging glances that clearly communicated their shock at what they were witnessing. "Mr. Morrison," Tom Bradley finally intervened, his voice strained, "I think you should—" "No, Tom, I'm tired of pretending. This whole thing is ridiculous. I've been with this company for 4 years. I've worked my way up from the ground level. I have an MBA from Westfield State. And now some girl who was filing papers and making coffee is going to decide my future? It's insulting." The worst part wasn't just what he was saying, it was how he was saying it. The condescension in his voice when he called me some girl, the way he gestured dismissively in my direction without even looking at me, the assumption that his credentials automatically trumped any evidence of his actual performance.
But what really sealed his fate was what came next. "Besides," Blake added, his voice taking on a nastier edge, "I happen to know for a fact that this analysis is personally motivated. This woman has reasons to want to see me fail that have nothing to do with business." The room went completely still. CEO Vance leaned forward slowly. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Morrison?" Blake seemed to realize he'd crossed a line, but it was too late to stop. She's my fiancé's sister. This whole presentation is probably some kind of family drama being played out in our boardroom." I watched as every face in the room turned toward me, then back to Blake, processing this information. Mr. Hartwell looked stunned, clearly wondering if Blake's accusation had any merit. The executives were exchanging glances that ranged from confusion to disgust. CEO Vance stood up slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Mr. Morrison, are you seriously suggesting that our consulting firm would compromise their professional integrity for personal reasons? Are you accusing Miss Reyes of fabricating data?" "I'm just saying the timing is suspicious," Blake muttered, finally seeming to realize how badly he'd miscalculated. That's when I knew I had won, even before the real victory came. Blake had just handed me everything I needed on a silver platter. He had revealed himself to be exactly what my data suggested: unprofessional, paranoid, and completely unable to handle pressure with grace. The meeting ended 10 minutes later with Blake being escorted out by Tom Bradley and CEO Vance requesting a private word with Mr. Hartwell. As I packed up my materials, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had wanted Blake to face consequences for his behavior, but watching him implode so spectacularly was almost painful. Almost. The boardroom felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Every eye was on me, waiting to see how I would respond to Blake's accusations. CEO Vance was still standing, her hands planted firmly on the table, while Mr. Hartwell looked like he was calculating whether our entire business relationship with Sterling Industries had just gone up in flames. I could have defended myself. I could have pointed out that Blake's personal attacks only proved he couldn't handle professional criticism. I could have explained that his own behavior was validating every concern raised in my analysis. Instead, I did something that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including myself. I smiled. Not a smug smile or a triumphant grin, but the same polite, professional smile I'd perfected during 3 years of greeting clients at the reception desk. I gathered my papers with the same careful precision I used every day, aligning the edges perfectly before placing them back in my portfolio. Mr. Morrison is correct about one thing.
He is my sister's fiancé, and I should have disclosed that relationship at the beginning of this presentation. That was an oversight on my part, and I apologize to everyone in this room for not being completely transparent. Blake's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected me to acknowledge the connection so readily. CFO Chen leaned back in his chair, and I could see him reassessing the entire situation. However, I continued, standing slowly and addressing CEO Vance directly. I want to be very clear about something. Every data point in this analysis is independently verifiable. Every metric is pulled from official company reports, industry benchmarks, and documented performance indicators. The numbers don't lie, regardless of who presents them. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a thick folder I'd prepared as backup documentation. Mrs. Vance, if you have any concerns about the validity of this assessment due to the personal connection Mr. Morrison has raised, I would be happy to have any independent analyst review my work. I'm confident they'll reach the same conclusions. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. Tom Bradley was staring at his hands, probably wondering how his employee had managed to create such a disaster. Sarah Martinez was taking notes, her pen moving quickly across her pad. Furthermore, I said, placing the backup folder on the table in front of CEO Vance, I think Mr. Morrison's reaction actually demonstrates some of the management challenges highlighted in our analysis. When faced with performance feedback, effective leaders typically ask questions about methodology, request clarification on specific metrics, or propose action plans for improvement. They don't attack the messenger or claim the data is fabricated. Blake's face had gone from red to pale, and I could see him starting to understand the hole he'd dug for himself. But I wasn't finished. I've had the privilege of working with Mr. Hartwell for 3 years, observing how professional consulting relationships function. I've seen dozens of executives receive difficult feedback about their departments or their performance. The ones who succeed are those who can separate their ego from the data and focus on solutions rather than blame.
I paused, looking around the room at each face. I understand that Mr. Morrison feels this analysis is unfair or personally motivated. That's his right. But the beautiful thing about data is that it exists independently of our feelings about it. Revenue numbers don't care if we like them. Efficiency metrics don't change based on who calculates them. Client satisfaction scores remain the same regardless of who presents them. Mr. Hartwell was watching me with something that looked like pride, mixed with amazement. I suspected he'd never seen this side of me before. Not the quiet receptionist who smiled and scheduled appointments, but someone who could hold her ground in a room full of executives without raising her voice or losing her composure. Mr. Morrison mentioned his credentials, and he's right that he has an MBA from Westfield State. That's an impressive achievement, and I respect the education and hard work that represents. My background is different. I have an associate's degree from Riverside Community College and 3 years of hands-on experience in business consulting. Neither approach is inherently better or worse. What matters is results. I gestured toward the presentation screen, which still displayed the departmental performance charts. The question isn't whether I'm qualified to present this data. The question is whether Sterling Industries wants to address the performance gaps the data reveals, regardless of who identified them. CEO Vance finally sat back down, her expression thoughtful. Ms. Reyes, I appreciate your transparency about the personal connection, and I'm impressed by your professionalism in addressing Mr. Morrison's concerns. However, I do need to ask, did your relationship to Mr. Morrison influence your analysis in any way? That's a fair question, I replied without hesitation. Before this project began, I knew that Blake worked at Sterling Industries, but I didn't know which department he was in or what his role entailed. When I started analyzing the departmental data, I focused on the numbers first and identified the marketing development division as an area of concern before I realized Blake worked there. This was technically true. I had started with company-wide data and let the numbers guide my analysis, even though I'd been particularly interested in finding Blake's department once I knew he worked there. When I did realize the connection, I went back and triple-checked every calculation related to that division. I wanted to be absolutely certain that my findings were objective and accurate.
In fact, I probably scrutinized the marketing development data more carefully than any other department, precisely because of the personal relationship. Blake tried to interrupt. That's convenient. Mr. Morrison, CEO Vance said sharply, you've said enough. In fact, you've said far too much. The finality in her voice seemed to hit Blake like a physical blow. He closed his mouth and slumped back in his chair, finally seeming to understand that his outburst had backfired catastrophically. I looked directly at him for the first time since his attack began. Blake, I understand that you're upset and that this feels personal to you, but I want you to know that this analysis would be exactly the same if you were a complete stranger. The data is what it is. Then I did something that I think surprised everyone, including myself. I sat back down and opened my portfolio to a fresh section. Now, if Sterling Industries would like to move forward with the assessment, I'd like to present some recommendations for addressing the performance gaps we've identified. Some departments are struggling, but that doesn't mean the situation can't be improved with the right strategies and leadership changes. The shift in the room's energy was palpable. What had been a personal attack had suddenly become a professional discussion again. Mr. Hartwell nodded approvingly, and I could see several executives leaning forward with renewed interest. I believe in solutions, not just problems, and I think Sterling Industries has the potential to turn these underperforming areas into success stories with the right approach. CEO Vance looked around the table, then back at me. Ms. Reyes, I'd very much like to hear those recommendations. Mr. Bradley, please escort Mr. Morrison out of this meeting. We'll discuss his situation separately. As Blake was led from the room, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, exactly, but a quiet satisfaction that came from handling a difficult situation with grace instead of anger. I had taken his worst attack and turned it into a demonstration of exactly why I deserved to be in that room, and I had done it without ever raising my voice or stooping to his level. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one that proves your opponent's point for them.
What Blake Morrison didn't know, what nobody in that boardroom knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment far longer than the 3 days since my conversation with Mr. Hartwell. In fact, I'd been building toward this confrontation for almost 2 years, ever since the first family dinner where Blake had made it clear what he thought of me. It started innocently enough. After that initial dinner at my parents' house on Maple Street, where Blake had spent the evening making subtle digs about my temporary job and starter apartment, I'd gone home and done something that felt petty at the time. I'd looked up Sterling Industries online, just to see what kind of company employed someone with such an inflated sense of self-importance. What I found was interesting. Sterling Industries was a mid-sized manufacturing and distribution company with about 800 employees and annual revenue in the $150 million range. Solid, but not spectacular. The kind of company where middle management positions like Blake's were well-paying, but not exactly executive-level power positions. Certainly nothing that justified the condescending attitude he displayed toward my career choices. But the more I dug, the more fascinated I became. Not with Blake specifically, but with the company itself. Sterling Industries had been family-owned for 3 generations before going public in 2018. They'd been struggling with the transition from family business to corporate structure, and their stock price had been volatile for the past 2 years. Reading their quarterly reports became a guilty pleasure, like following a soap opera. Then, 6 months ago, something changed. Mr. Hartwell mentioned over coffee that Sterling Industries had reached out about a potential consulting contract. They were looking at organizational optimization, which in business consulting speak meant they were preparing to cut costs through layoffs and restructuring. That's when my casual interest became strategic planning. I started staying late at the office, using my access to industry databases and market research tools that I'd learned to navigate during slow afternoons at the reception desk. While other people went home to watch Netflix, I was cross-referencing Sterling's performance metrics with industry benchmarks, analyzing their supply chain efficiency and tracking their customer satisfaction trends. I discovered that Sterling Industries' problems went far deeper than Blake's underperforming department. They were losing market share to more agile competitors, their manufacturing costs were 12% above industry average, and their customer retention rate had dropped 8% over the past year.
The marketing development division, Blake's domain, wasn't just failing to generate new business, it was actively damaging relationships with existing clients through poor campaign execution and missed deadlines. But here's what made my preparation truly devastating. I didn't just collect data, I collected context. During family gatherings, Blake loved to talk about work. He'd complain about unrealistic expectations from his bosses, criticize his team members for being unmotivated, and blame poor performance on everything from market conditions to inadequate budgets. What he thought were casual conversations, I treated as intelligence briefings. When he mentioned losing the Henderson manufacturing account, I researched Henderson's public statements about why they'd switched to a competitor. They cited poor communication and failure to meet agreed-upon deliverables, exactly the kind of client relationship issues that showed up in Sterling satisfaction surveys. When Blake bragged about his innovative social media campaign that had generated tons of engagement, I looked up the actual metrics. The campaign had indeed generated engagement, mostly negative comments and complaints from confused customers who couldn't understand the messaging. The company had quietly killed the campaign after 2 weeks and issued an apology to their email subscribers. When he complained about his team missing quarterly targets, I cross-referenced those dates with Sterling's earnings reports. Sure enough, the marketing development division's failures were specifically mentioned in their investor calls as a factor in missed revenue projections. Blake was essentially providing me with a real-time case study in management failure, and he didn't even realize it. But the most valuable piece of intelligence came from an unexpected source, Jasmine herself. 3 months ago, during a shopping trip for her wedding dress, Jasmine had confided that Blake was stressed at work. "He's been having trouble sleeping," she had said, trying on a gorgeous ivory gown at Belmont Bridal. "He thinks his boss might be looking for reasons to let him go. There's been talk of bringing in consultants to evaluate efficiency, whatever that means." That's when I knew Sterling Industries was serious about restructuring and that Blake's position was vulnerable. That's also when I started documenting everything more carefully. I created detailed files on every piece of information that crossed my desk related to Sterling Industries. I mapped their organizational structure, tracked their key performance indicators, and maintained careful notes on every phone conversation, email exchange, and document that came through Hartwell & Associates.
When Mr. Hartwell mentioned that Sterling was specifically concerned about middle management performance, I already had 18 months' worth of data showing exactly which middle managers were failing and why. The analysis I'd presented in the boardroom wasn't thrown together over a weekend. It was the culmination of nearly 2 years of methodical intelligence gathering, much of it provided unwittingly by Blake himself. But the preparation went beyond just data collection. I'd also been preparing myself. I enrolled in online courses in business analytics and project management, studying during lunch breaks and weekends. I attended webinars on corporate restructuring and read every business strategy book I could get my hands on. I practiced presentations in my apartment, speaking to my reflection in the bathroom mirror until I could deliver complex information clearly and confidently. I knew that when the opportunity came, I would need to be more than just someone with damaging information about Blake Morrison. I would need to be someone who deserved to be in that boardroom, someone whose analysis and recommendations had value beyond personal satisfaction. The most crucial part of my preparation, though, was psychological. I spent months visualizing this moment, not just the confrontation with Blake, but everything that would come after. I thought through how I would handle his inevitable attempts to discredit me, how I would maintain my professionalism under pressure, and how I would turn his attack into evidence of his unfitness for leadership. I even anticipated his accusation about our family relationship. In fact, I'd been waiting for him to bring it up because I knew it would backfire. A competent professional would have disclosed the potential conflict of interest from the beginning and then focused on the substance of the analysis. A desperate amateur would try to use the relationship to dismiss valid criticism without addressing the underlying issues. Blake had chosen to be the desperate amateur. As I sat in that boardroom watching him being escorted out by Tom Bradley, I felt the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly.
Not because I'd destroyed someone's career, that had been entirely his own doing, but because I'd proven that preparation and patience could overcome privilege and prejudice. The beauty of it was that everything I'd done was completely legitimate. I hadn't stolen information or fabricated data. I'd simply paid attention when everyone else assumed I wasn't worth noticing. I'd turned my invisibility into my greatest asset. Blake Morrison had spent 2 years unknowingly providing the ammunition for his own downfall, and I had spent 2 years carefully, methodically loading the gun. Now, all that remained was watching the consequences unfold. The call came at 8:47 a.m. on Friday morning, exactly 18 hours after Blake's spectacular meltdown in the Sterling Industries boardroom. I was in my new office, a real office with a door and a window overlooking the warehouse district, reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. "Catalina, this is Patricia Vance from Sterling Industries. Do you have a moment to talk?" My heart rate picked up, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course, Mrs. Vance. How can I help you?" I'll cut straight to the point. After yesterday's meeting and some extensive discussions with our executive team, we've made several decisions. First, we're terminating our relationship with Mr. Morrison, effective immediately. His behavior yesterday was completely unacceptable, and frankly, your analysis confirmed some concerns we've had about his department's performance for months. I felt a flush of satisfaction, but I kept my response professional. "I understand. That must have been a difficult decision." "Actually, it wasn't," she replied with a dry laugh. "What was difficult was admitting we should have made it sooner, but that's not why I'm calling. Catalina, I want to offer you a position." The words hung in the air for a moment while I processed them. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "Sterling Industries would like to hire you as our new director of strategic analysis. The position would involve overseeing our internal performance metrics, conducting efficiency assessments, and working directly with department heads to implement improvements. The salary would be $78,000 annually, plus benefits and a performance bonus structure." I nearly dropped the phone. The offer was more than double what I was making at Hartwell's and Associates, and the title was exactly the kind of position I'd been working toward for years. "Mrs. Vance, I'm honored by the offer, but I should mention that I'm very happy in my current role with Mr. Hartwell, and I've already spoken with James Hartwell. He agrees that this opportunity would be excellent for your career development. In fact, he suggested we might maintain a consulting relationship where you could work on joint projects between our companies. Everyone wins."
The conversation lasted another 20 minutes as we discussed details, start dates, and responsibilities. By the time I hung up, I was staring at an offer letter that would fundamentally change my life. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the title. It was the realization that I had earned this through competence, not connections or manipulation. What I didn't expect was how quickly word would spread. By noon, Tom Bradley had called to formally apologize for Blake's behavior and to express his hope that the incident wouldn't affect our company's relationship. By 2 p.m., Sarah Martinez had reached out to congratulate me on the new position and to schedule a meeting about potential collaboration between our departments. By 4 p.m., 3 other Sterling Industries employees had contacted me directly to express their excitement about working with me. But the real shock came when my phone rang at 5:30 p.m., just as I was packing up my things. "Catalina?" The voice was shaky, uncertain. It's Blake." I sat back down in my chair, suddenly alert. "Hello, Blake?" Look, I know I messed up yesterday. I know I said some things that were out of line. I was wondering if we could talk, maybe grab coffee or something. I think there might be some misunderstandings I could clear up." The desperation in his voice was palpable. I could picture him sitting in his apartment, the one in Maplewood Heights that he was so proud of, trying to figure out how to salvage his career. "Blake, I don't think coffee is going to solve the issues that came up in yesterday's meeting.
Please, Catalina, I know we haven't always gotten along, but we're going to be family soon. Can't we work something out? Maybe you could put in a good word for me with Mrs. Vance. I have a mortgage, car payments. Jasmine and I have the wedding to pay for. There was something almost surreal about the conversation. This was the same person who had called me pathetic at the engagement party, who had dismissed my qualifications in front of Sterling's entire executive team, who had spent 2 years treating me like I was beneath his notice. Now he was begging me for help. Blake, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. I don't have influence over Sterling Industries' personnel decisions. Mrs. Vance made her choice based on your behavior and your department's performance metrics. This isn't something I can fix for you. But you could try, right? You could explain that I was just stressed, that I didn't mean what I said about your qualifications. We both know I'm smart. I never said you weren't smart. I just thought... You thought what, Blake? The silence stretched out for several seconds. I thought you were just the receptionist. The honesty in his admission was almost refreshing. I was the receptionist, Blake. That doesn't mean I was only the receptionist. I know that now. I see that now. Look, Catalina, I'm sorry, okay? I'm really, truly sorry for how I treated you. For the things I said at the engagement party, for what happened yesterday, for all of it. I was wrong. His apology might have meant something 6 months ago, or even a week ago. But sitting in my new office, holding an offer letter that represented everything I'd worked toward, it felt hollow and self-serving. I appreciate the apology, Blake, but I think this conversation is something you should be having with Jasmine, not with me. I tried. She's not taking my calls right now. She saw the news about Sterling Industries letting me go. It was in the business section of the Riverside Chronicle this morning. I hadn't seen the newspaper article, but I wasn't surprised it had made the news. Sterling Industries was a significant employer in Riverside, and sudden personnel changes at that level often got media attention. What did the article say? It mentioned that they'd hired a new director of strategic analysis and that there had been some organizational changes in the marketing development division. It didn't name me specifically, but people in our industry talk. Word gets around fast. The reality of his situation was starting to sink in. In a city the size of Riverside, news of a public meltdown at Sterling Industries would spread quickly through professional networks. His reputation was damaged not just at Sterling, but potentially throughout the local business community. Blake, I think you need to focus on moving forward, not trying to undo what's already happened. Easy for you to say, you got promoted, I got fired.
There it was, the resentment beneath the apology, the assumption that my success had somehow caused his failure. Even in his moment of desperation, he couldn't quite grasp that his downfall had been entirely self-inflicted. "You're right," I said quietly. "I did get promoted because I spent 3 years preparing for an opportunity like this, and when it came, I was ready for it. Your situation isn't my fault, Blake. It's the consequence of choices you made." The call ended shortly after that, with Blake muttering something about talking to Jasmine and figuring things out. As I hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction, certainly, but also a kind of sadness for the person he could have been if he'd chosen to treat people with respect instead of condescension. But the sadness was fleeting. As I walked out of the Hartwell & Associates building for the last time as an employee, I felt something much stronger. The quiet confidence that comes from proving yourself in the most public way possible. Monday morning, I would walk into Sterling Industries not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone who had earned her place through competence, preparation, and grace under pressure. Blake Morrison's story was ending. Mine was just beginning. The ripple effects began before I even started my new position at Sterling Industries. By Sunday evening, 2 days after Blake's termination, my phone hadn't stopped buzzing with calls and messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. The first was from my cousin Maria, who worked in HR at TechFlow Solutions downtown.
Kat, I just heard through the grapevine about what happened at Sterling. Is it true you're their new director of strategic analysis? That's incredible. Listen, we've been looking for someone to help with our efficiency assessments. Would you be interested in some consulting work? Then came a call from Dr. Rebecca Walsh, my former business professor at Riverside Community College. Catalina, I've been following your career progression and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. I have several students who could benefit from hearing your story. Would you consider being a guest speaker in my strategic management class? But the most unexpected call came from Jordan Martinez, a former classmate who now worked at Pinnacle Marketing Group. Catalina, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but the whole Blake Morrison story is making waves in the marketing community. Everyone's talking about what happened at Sterling Industries. A few of us have been discussing starting a professional development group for business analysts in the area. Would you be interested in being one of our founding members? By Monday morning, as I prepared for my first day at Sterling Industries, I realized that Blake's public meltdown had inadvertently launched my professional reputation in ways I never could have planned. His attempt to discredit me had backfired so spectacularly that it had actually become a case study in how not to handle professional criticism. Meanwhile, Blake's world was falling apart in increasingly public ways. The first sign came when I arrived at Sterling Industries for my orientation and found Tom Bradley waiting for me in the lobby. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept much over the weekend. Catalina, I wanted to catch you before you settled in. I owe you another apology for what happened in that meeting. Blake's behavior was inexcusable, and I should have shut it down immediately instead of letting him continue. Mr. Bradley, that's not necessary. You weren't responsible for his choices. Maybe not, but I was responsible for managing him, and clearly I failed there. He paused, looking uncomfortable. I also wanted to give you a heads up. Blake has been reaching out to people, trying to do damage control. Some of the stories he's telling about what happened don't exactly match reality. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. What kind of stories? He's claiming the whole analysis was fabricated, that you manipulated the data to target him personally. He's telling people that Sterling Industries made a mistake, that they'll realize it soon, and bring him back. He's also... Tom hesitated. He's been contacting our clients, trying to convince them that the company is making poor decisions. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after being terminated for unprofessional behavior, Blake was still trying to salvage his reputation by destroying others. But what he didn't understand was that his credibility was already shot, and every desperate move he made only reinforced why Sterling Industries had been right to let him go. Has anyone taken his claims seriously? I asked. Tom shook his head. Actually, quite the opposite. 3 clients have specifically mentioned how impressed they were with our decision to bring you on board. Apparently, word is getting around that Sterling Industries is taking a more analytical, professional approach to business operations. The irony was perfect. Blake's attempts to undermine me were actually enhancing my reputation and Sterling Industries' credibility. Every time he told someone that I was unqualified or that the analysis was biased, he reminded them of his own unprofessional behavior in that boardroom.
But the real drama was happening closer to home. Tuesday evening, my mother called. Her voice was strained, careful. Catalina, honey, I need to talk to you about Jasmine. My sister had been notably absent from my congratulations calls over the weekend. I'd assumed she was processing the situation with Blake, but apparently it was more complicated than that. She's been staying with your father and me since Friday night, Mom continued. She and Blake had a terrible fight after he was fired. She's questioning everything about the engagement, about their relationship. She asked me to call you. She couldn't call me herself? She's embarrassed, sweetheart. She feels awful about how Blake treated you, and she's not sure how to face you after everything that's happened. That evening, Jasmine showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her engagement ring notably absent from her left hand. "I'm sorry," she said before I could even invite her in. "I'm so sorry for not standing up for you at the engagement party, for not seeing who Blake really was, for letting him treat you the way he did."
We sat on my small couch, the same couch Blake had once dismissed as college furniture, and talked for 3 hours. Jasmine told me about the fight they'd had after his termination, how he'd blamed me for ruining his life, and insisted that I somehow orchestrated the entire situation out of jealousy. He actually said you were jealous of our relationship, Jasmine said, shaking her head in disbelief. He couldn't understand that maybe, just maybe, he'd brought this on himself. What changed your mind about him? I asked. Honestly, watching that phone call he made to you on Friday, I was sitting right there when he called you, begging for help. The same person who had called you pathetic was suddenly asking you to save his career. The hypocrisy was so obvious, I couldn't ignore it anymore. But Blake's reputation wasn't just personal in our family circle. By Wednesday, I was hearing stories from multiple sources about his increasingly desperate behavior. Sarah Martinez mentioned that he'd shown up at Sterling Industries on Tuesday morning trying to convince security to let him speak with Mrs. Vance. When they refused, he had apparently stood in the parking lot for an hour attempting to intercept executives as they arrived for work. Jordan Martinez called to tell me that Blake had contacted Pinnacle Marketing Group, claiming that Sterling Industries had made a politically motivated hiring decision and suggesting that they shouldn't do business with the company. The conversation had ended with Pinnacle's CEO asking Blake to stop calling. Most telling of all was the call I received from Mr. Hartwell on Thursday afternoon. Catalina, I wanted to let you know that Blake Morrison contacted our office this morning. He wanted to file a complaint about your conduct during the Sterling Industries project. A complaint? On what grounds? He's claiming conflict of interest, unprofessional behavior, and falsification of data. Of course, we have all the documentation showing that your analysis was thorough and accurate. I told him that if he wanted to pursue legal action, he was welcome to do so, but that we were confident in our work and your professionalism. The desperation in Blake's behavior was becoming more obvious by the day. Instead of accepting responsibility for his behavior and moving forward, he was doubling down on his victimhood narrative. Every desperate move he made, every angry phone call, every attempt to rewrite history only validated the original assessment of his character and competence. His downfall wasn't just professional anymore. It was becoming a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and desperation override professionalism and self-awareness.
3 weeks into my new role at Sterling Industries, I received an unexpected invitation that would change everything. Linda Rodriguez, the editor of Business Perspectives Quarterly, Riverside's premier professional publication, called me on a Tuesday morning with a request that caught me completely off guard. Ms. Reyes, I've been following your story and the situation at Sterling Industries. I think there's a larger conversation to be had about workplace professionalism, merit-based advancement, and how organizations handle conflict. Would you be willing to do an interview about your experience? My first instinct was to decline. The last thing I wanted was to appear vindictive or to further damage Blake's already ruined reputation. But Linda persisted. This isn't about personal drama, she explained. It's about leadership, about how companies can better identify and develop talent, and about the importance of maintaining professionalism under pressure. Your handling of that boardroom situation has become something of a case study in our business community. After discussing it with Mr. Hartwell and Mrs. Vance, both of whom encouraged me to share my perspective, I agreed to the interview. What I didn't expect was how powerful it would feel to finally tell my story in my own words. The interview took place in the Business Perspectives offices downtown, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Riverside Business District. Linda was a sharp woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a direct manner that immediately put me at ease. Let's start with the basics, she said, settling into her chair with a digital recorder between us. Can you walk me through what happened in that Sterling Industries boardroom? I've heard several versions of the story, but I'd like to hear yours. I took a breath and began with the facts. The analysis, the presentation, Blake's reaction, and my response. But as I spoke, something unexpected happened. I found myself talking not just about what had occurred, but about what it represented. The thing that struck me most about that situation, I said, wasn't the personal attack. It was the assumption underlying it.
that credentials matter more than competence, that titles matter more than results, and that where you went to school matters more than what you've learned since then. Linda leaned forward, clearly engaged. Can you elaborate on that? Blake Morrison has an MBA from a respected university. He had a director-level title and 4 years of experience at Sterling Industries. On paper, he was more qualified than I was. But qualifications on paper don't tell you how someone handles pressure, how they treat their colleagues, or whether they can separate their ego from their work. I found myself speaking with a confidence I hadn't known I possessed, addressing not just Blake's behavior, but the broader issues it represented. In that boardroom, we had a perfect example of 2 different approaches to professional criticism. When faced with data showing performance problems, Blake's response was to attack the messenger, question the methodology without examining it, and assume personal motivation rather than professional assessment. That reaction actually validated every concern the analysis had raised about his leadership capabilities. In your approach? I tried to separate the personal from the professional. Yes, Blake's attack was hurtful, but it was also irrelevant to the substance of the analysis. The data was either accurate or it wasn't. The recommendations were either sound or they weren't. His opinion of my credentials didn't change the facts. Linda asked about my background, and I found myself sharing things I'd never articulated before. How working reception had taught me to read people and situations, how observing business operations from the ground level had given me insights that executive training might miss, how being underestimated had actually been an advantage. There's a certain freedom in being invisible, I explained. When people don't see you as a threat, they tell you things they shouldn't. They let you overhear conversations you weren't meant to hear. They assume you're not smart enough or ambitious enough to understand the implications of what you're witnessing. Do you think that invisibility was intentional on your part? I paused, considering the question. Not initially, but I learned to use it strategically. Instead of demanding to be included in meetings, I made sure I understood what happened in those meetings. Instead of pushing for recognition, I focused on building competence. Instead of trying to change people's perceptions of me, I worked on becoming the person I wanted to be recognized as. The conversation turned to workplace dynamics and the importance of merit-based advancement. This was where I felt most passionate, most certain of my message. I think organizations often fail to recognize talent because they're looking in the wrong places. They focus on degrees and previous titles instead of actual performance. They promote people who sound impressive in interviews rather than people who deliver results. They mistake confidence for competence and mistake volume for value. What advice would you give to other people who feel underestimated in their careers?
First, don't waste energy fighting for recognition. Invest that energy in becoming undeniably competent. Second, pay attention to everything around you. Every company has inefficiencies, problems, and opportunities that are obvious to people doing the actual work, but invisible to people in corner offices. Third, when your moment comes, and it will come, be ready for it. Linda asked about the family dynamics, the complicated situation with my sister and Blake's engagement. This was the most difficult part of the interview, but also the most important. The personal relationship made the situation more complex, but it also made it more revealing, I said carefully. Blake's behavior toward me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The same dismissiveness he showed toward my career, he showed toward my sister's concerns. The same inability to handle criticism professionally, he demonstrated in their personal relationship. Character is character, whether you're in a boardroom or a living room. Do you think the family connection influenced your analysis of his performance? Absolutely. It made me more careful, not less. I knew that any assessment of Blake's work would be scrutinized because of our relationship, so I triple-checked every data point. I wanted to be absolutely certain that my findings were objective and accurate. In some ways, the family connection forced me to do better work than I might have otherwise. Near the end of the interview, Linda asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you have any regrets about how this situation unfolded? I thought for a long moment before answering. I regret that Blake chose to handle the situation the way he did. I regret that my sister had to discover her fiancé's true character in such a public way.
I regret that Sterling Industries had to deal with the disruption and embarrassment of his behavior. But I don't regret presenting accurate information about the company's performance, and I don't regret maintaining my professionalism when he attacked me personally. What do you hope people take away from your story? That competence matters more than credentials, that character reveals itself under pressure, that you don't have to tear other people down to build yourself up, and that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is simply proving it wrong through your actions. The interview was published 2 weeks later under the headline, Rising Above, a case study in professional grace under pressure. The article was shared hundreds of times on social media and generated responses from business leaders, HR professionals, and working people across the region who said it had resonated with their own experiences. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source, Dr. Walsh, my former professor, who sent me a handwritten note saying, "You've become exactly the kind of leader this business community needs. Your voice matters, and I hope you'll continue using it." For the first time since this whole situation began, I realized that my story had become bigger than just personal vindication. It had become a statement about values, about how we treat each other in professional settings, and about the importance of substance over style. I had found my voice, and I was just beginning to understand its power. The response to the Business Perspectives quarterly article was unlike anything I could have imagined. Within 48 hours of publication, my LinkedIn inbox was flooded with messages from professionals across the region, and my office phone at Sterling Industries was ringing constantly with interview requests from other publications. But what surprised me most wasn't the media attention, it was the personal stories people began sharing. The first call came from Rebecca Torres, a senior accountant at Morrison and Associates. "Catalina, I read your interview and I had to reach out. 5 years ago, I was passed over for a promotion because my supervisor said I didn't have the leadership presence for the role. They gave it to someone with an MBA, who lasted 6 months before being transferred due to performance issues. Your story gave me the courage to apply for a director position at another firm. I got the job." Then came an email from Marcus Williams, a project manager at Riverside Construction. "Your article hit home for me. I've been working in construction for 15 years, started as a laborer, worked my way up through every level. Last month, they brought in an operations consultant with a business degree who'd never been on a construction site. He lasted 3 weeks before admitting he was in over his head. Your point about competence versus credentials, that's everything." By the end of the week, I had received over 200 messages from people sharing similar experiences. Marketing coordinators who'd been overlooked for promotions given to less qualified external hires, administrative assistants whose strategic insights had been dismissed until they proved their value elsewhere, mid-level managers who'd been undermined by colleagues who prioritized politics over performance. The most touching message came from Angela Rodriguez, a 45-year-old customer service representative who'd been with her company for 12 years. "Ms. Reyes, I've been invisible for so long, I started to believe I was supposed to be. Your story reminded me that I see things others don't, that I know things others don't, and that my experience has value. I'm finally going to apply for the training coordinator position I've been thinking about for 2 years." But the validation wasn't just coming from individual professionals. Organizations began reaching out as well. Dr. Walsh called to invite me to speak at the Riverside Community College Career Development Workshop. "Catalina, we have 200 students registered for this event, most of them first-generation college students who feel like they're starting behind everyone else. Your story could change how they think about their potential." The Riverside Chamber of Commerce asked me to keynote their annual professional development luncheon. The Society for Human Resource Management wanted me to lead a workshop on identifying hidden talent in your organization. 3 different business schools requested permission to use my story as a case study in their management courses. Most significantly, Patricia Vance called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon with an unexpected proposal. Catalina, I've been watching the response to your interview, and I think we're missing an opportunity. Sterling Industries has always struggled with talent development and internal promotion. We're good at hiring external candidates with impressive resumes, but we're terrible at recognizing and developing the potential in our existing workforce. She leaned back in her chair, studying me thoughtfully. I want to create a new position, Director of Talent Development and Internal Advancement. The role would involve identifying high-potential employees who might be overlooked by traditional promotion processes, developing mentorship programs, and creating pathways for non-traditional career advancement. Interested? The position would be a significant step up from my current role, with a corresponding increase in salary and responsibility. But more importantly, it would allow me to systematically address the issues that my story had highlighted. Mrs. Vance, I'm very interested, but I want to make sure I understand the scope. Are we talking about changing how Sterling Industries approaches talent management company-wide? Exactly. I want to pilot a program here and then potentially expand it to our other locations. If it works the way I think it could, we might be looking at licensing the program to other companies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Blake Morrison's attempt to discredit me had led directly to an opportunity to transform how Sterling Industries and potentially other companies identified and developed talent. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source: the people who had witnessed my original confrontation with Blake. Tom Bradley, who had been Blake's supervisor, requested a private meeting with me. Catalina, I've been thinking a lot about what happened in that boardroom, and I realize I learned something important that day. I've been managing people for 15 years, but I've never seen anyone handle that kind of pressure with the grace you showed. I've been recommending your article to every manager in my network. Sarah Martinez, the director of operations, approached me after a staff meeting. I wanted you to know that your handling of the Blake situation has changed how I approach conflict in my own department. When someone gets defensive about performance feedback now, I ask myself what you would do. Focus on the substance, not the emotions. Even more surprising was a call from James Hartwell. Catalina, I've had 3 companies contact me this week asking if we have other analysts like you. Your professionalism during that Sterling Industries presentation has become somewhat of a gold standard. I'm thinking about developing a training program based on your approach to handling workplace conflict. The most unexpected validation, however, came through Jasmine. She had broken off her engagement with Blake permanently and was slowly rebuilding her relationship with our family. During lunch at Cafe Luna downtown, she shared something that caught me completely off guard. Kat, I need to tell you something. After the engagement party, after Blake called you pathetic, I actually defended him to Mom and Dad. I told them he was just stressed about work, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. She paused, stirring her coffee absently. But then I started paying attention to how he talked about other people. Servers at restaurants, cashiers at stores, anyone he considered beneath him. The pattern was always there. I just didn't want to see it. What changed? Watching how you handled that boardroom situation. You could have destroyed him. You had every right to fight back, to get angry, to make it personal. Instead, you stayed focused on the work, on the truth. You showed more class in 10 minutes than he showed in 2 years.
She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Kat, not just for the promotion or the articles or any of that. I'm proud of who you are, who you've always been. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. But perhaps the most profound moment of validation came during the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, where I was the keynote speaker. As I looked out at an audience of 300 business leaders, I saw faces that represented every level of Riverside's professional community. CEOs and administrative assistants, senior partners and recent graduates, established executives and ambitious newcomers. In the middle of my presentation about recognizing hidden talent, I noticed a familiar face in the audience. Blake Morrison was sitting near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable.
He had apparently managed to find some kind of employment, though from his appearance, it wasn't at the level he was accustomed to. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I felt a flash of something, not anger, not satisfaction, but something closer to sadness for the person he could have been if he'd chosen differently. But I didn't let the moment derail my presentation. Instead, I used it to reinforce my key message. Character isn't revealed in moments of success, it's revealed in moments of challenge. How we handle criticism, how we treat people we perceive as having less power than us, how we respond when our assumptions are challenged, these are the moments that define who we really are. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for my presentation. It was validation of a principle that the entire business community seemed hungry to embrace. That substance matters more than style, that character matters more than credentials, and that everyone deserves to be judged by their contributions, not their titles. As I left the podium that day, I realized that Blake Morrison had given me an unexpected gift. His attempt to diminish me had forced me to define myself, not in opposition to him, but in alignment with my own values and capabilities. The community hadn't just validated my story, they had validated the principles it represented. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation that changed everything, I found myself standing in front of a whiteboard covered with organizational charts, development timelines, and program objectives. The conference room at Sterling Industries had been transformed into the headquarters for what we were calling the Catalyst Initiative, a comprehensive talent development program that would fundamentally change how the company identified and nurtured potential. The initiative had grown far beyond my original Director of Talent Development role. What started as a simple internal program had evolved into something that could reshape workplace culture across the region. Mrs. Vance had given me carte blanche to build something revolutionary, and I was determined not to waste the opportunity. The traditional promotion pipeline is broken, I explained to the implementation team we'd assembled, a diverse group of HR professionals, department managers, and employee representatives from across Sterling Industries. We promote people based on tenure, education credentials, and who speaks loudest in meetings. Meanwhile, the people actually solving problems, improving processes, and understanding our customers' needs often remain invisible. The Catalyst Initiative was designed to address this fundamental flaw through 3 core components. First, the Shadow Leadership Program would identify employees who are already demonstrating leadership qualities without formal recognition. The Administrative Assistant, who streamlined departmental communications. The Warehouse Supervisor, who reduced shipping errors by 40%. The Customer Service Representative, who developed solutions that prevented client complaints. Second, we created skills over titles career pathways that would allow people to advance based on demonstrated competencies rather than traditional promotion hierarchies. A receptionist with exceptional analytical abilities could transition into business intelligence. A maintenance worker with natural project management skills could move into operations coordination. Experience and performance would matter more than where someone started or what degree they held. And third, and most importantly, we implemented what I called dignity-based performance management. Instead of top-down evaluations that often reflected management bias, we created peer assessment systems, customer feedback integration, and objective performance metrics that revealed actual contribution and potential. The pilot program launched with 50 employees across 5 departments. Within 3 months, we had results that exceeded everyone's expectations. Maria Santos, a billing clerk who had been with Sterling for 8 years, was identified through the Shadow Leadership Program as someone who had quietly revolutionized the accounts receivable process. Her innovations had reduced collection time by 25% and virtually eliminated billing errors. Under the traditional system, Maria would have remained in billing indefinitely. Through Catalyst Initiative, she was promoted to Financial Process Manager with a 35% salary increase.
David Kim, a warehouse worker with associate degree in supply chain management, had been overlooked for advancement because he lacked management experience. Our skills assessment revealed that he had been unofficially mentoring new employees and had designed an inventory tracking system that other departments wanted to adopt. He became our new logistics coordinator. But the most meaningful success story was closer to home. Angela Rodriguez, the customer service representative who had emailed me after reading my interview, applied for our first Catalyst Initiative cohort. Her 12 years of experience had given her insights into customer behavior patterns that our marketing team had missed. She became our customer experience analyst and was already being considered for promotion to department management. Word of the Catalyst Initiative's success spread quickly through Riverside's business community. Within 6 months, I was fielding calls from companies across the region asking for consultation on implementing similar programs. Harrison Industries, Sterling's former competitor, became our first external client. Their CEO, David Chen, had been impressed by the results and wanted to pilot a modified version of our program. Catalina, we've been losing talented people to companies that recognize their potential faster than we do. The Catalyst Initiative could be exactly what we need to change that. More requests followed. Riverside Medical Center wanted to implement the program in their administrative departments. TechFlow Solutions was interested in applying the principles to their engineering teams. The city of Riverside approached us about using the framework for municipal employee development. But the most significant opportunity came from an unexpected source, the State Business Development Council. They invited me to present the Catalyst Initiative as a model for statewide workforce development. Ms. Reyes, said Council Director Barbara Walsh during our initial meeting, what you've created at Sterling Industries represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to address regional talent shortages. We're looking at potentially funding pilot programs across 5 counties. Would Sterling Industries be interested in serving as the implementation partner? The proposal was ambitious, a $2.3 million grant to expand the Catalyst Initiative to 50 companies across the region, with Sterling Industries serving as the coordinating organization. I would lead the program development, training, and oversight. It was an opportunity to impact thousands of careers and potentially transform workplace culture on a massive scale. As I worked on the grant proposal, I often thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. Blake Morrison's attack in that boardroom was meant to diminish me, to put me back in what he saw as my proper place. Instead, it had launched me into a career I never could have imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me that Blake's behavior had become a case study in exactly the kind of leadership failure the Catalyst Initiative was designed to prevent. In our training materials, we used anonymous examples of managers who responded to feedback with personal attacks, who prioritized credentials over competence, and who allowed ego to override professionalism. Blake had unwittingly provided the perfect illustration of everything we were working to change. But the program wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about creating systems that recognize and develop the potential that existed in every workplace, often hidden in plain sight. During one of our quarterly review meetings, Mrs. Vance shared a statistic that crystallized the impact we were having. Employee retention had increased by 28% in departments participating in the Catalyst Initiative, while productivity metrics had improved across every measured category. Catalina, what you've built here isn't just a talent development program, it's a fundamental shift in how we think about human potential in the workplace. The comment reminded me of something I learned during my 3 years at the reception desk. Everyone has capabilities that aren't immediately obvious. The question isn't whether talent exists, it's whether organizations are structured to recognize and develop it. The Catalyst Initiative had become my answer to that question. Every promotion, every success story, every employee who moved from invisible to invaluable validated the principle that had driven me from the beginning, that competence matters more than credentials, character matters more than connections, and potential matters than pedigree.
As I prepared for the state council presentation that could expand our program across the region, I realized that Blake Morrison had given me something invaluable. Not intentionally, and certainly not generously, but definitively. He had forced me to articulate and defend principles that had shaped my entire approach to work in leadership.
His attempt to tear me down had instead built something far more significant than personal vindication. It had built a framework for recognizing and developing the hidden potential that exists in every organization, waiting for someone to create the systems and opportunities needed to let it flourish. The pathetic girl he had dismissed at the engagement party was now positioned to transform how entire industries thought about talent development. Sometimes the greatest gift comes wrapped in the worst intentions. 1 year after the confrontation that changed my life, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. I was in my new corner office at Sterling Industries, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Riverside and walls lined with certificates from the organizations that had adopted the Catalyst initiative, when my assistant buzzed through. "Miss Reyes, there's a Blake Morrison on line 2. He says it's personal." I stared at the blinking light for a long moment, then picked up the phone. "Hello, Blake." His voice was different than I remembered, smaller somehow, lacking the aggressive confidence that had characterized our previous conversations. "Catalina, thank you for taking my call. I know I probably don't deserve your time." "What can I do for you, Blake?" I need to apologize. Really apologize. Not like that pathetic attempt I made after I got fired. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past year, and I realize how badly I handled everything. How badly I treated you. Through the window, I could see the Sterling Industries parking lot, where a year ago Blake had apparently staged his desperate attempt to speak with Mrs. Vance. Now it was filled with cars belonging to employees who were thriving under the new talent development programs we'd implemented. "I appreciate the apology, Blake. I hope you're doing well." "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I've been working with a career counselor, trying to figure out where I went wrong professionally. She suggested I reach out to you because you handled our situation with such professionalism. She thinks I could learn something from your approach." The irony was breathtaking. The same person who had questioned my qualifications in front of Sterling's executive team was now asking for career advice. But there was something in his tone, a genuine humility I'd never heard before, that made me listen. "What kind of help are you looking for?" "I'm trying to understand what happened to me. Not just the firing, but the whole pattern. The way I treated people, the way I responded to criticism, the way I let my ego drive my decisions. I've been unemployed for 8 months now, and every interview goes the same way. As soon as they do any kind of reference check or background investigation, I get eliminated from consideration." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Blake Morrison, the man who had called me pathetic, who had questioned my qualifications, who had spent months trying to damage my reputation, was asking for my help rebuilding his career. "Blake, I think the fact that you're recognizing these patterns is a good first step. What has your career counselor suggested?" "She says I need to make amends, not just apologize, but demonstrate that I've learned from my mistakes. She also says I need to rebuild my reputation through actions, not just words. The problem is nobody will give me a chance to prove I've changed." We talked for 20 more minutes. Blake shared that he'd been forced to move back in with his parents, that his savings were depleted, and that he was considering leaving Riverside entirely to start over somewhere else. But more importantly, he seemed to genuinely understand how his behavior had sabotaged not just his career, but his relationships and his sense of self. "Catalina, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to meet with me, maybe give me some advice about how to move forward? I promise I'm not trying to use our family connection or manipulate the situation. I don't know how to rebuild from here." After considerable thought, I agreed to meet him for coffee the following week. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because I was curious about whether people could truly change, and because I thought there might be value in understanding his perspective.
We met at Cafe Luna, the same place where Jasmine and I had reconciled months earlier. Blake looked different. Older, more tired, but also somehow more real than I'd ever seen him. Gone was the expensive suit and the arrogant posture. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and when he spoke, he made eye contact instead of looking through me. "I've been thinking about what you said in that Business Perspectives interview," he began after we'd ordered our coffee, "about character being revealed under pressure. I realized that every time I was under pressure, I chose to attack other people instead of examining my own performance."
He pulled out a notebook, something I never would have expected from the Blake Morrison I'd known. "I've been documenting my patterns, trying to understand where they came from and how to change them. I wanted to show you what I've learned, not to impress you, but to prove to myself that I can be honest about my failures." For the next hour, Blake walked me through a remarkably insightful analysis of his own behavior. He recognized how his insecurity had manifested as arrogance, how his fear of being exposed as inadequate had led him to attack anyone who threatened his position, and how his privileged background had insulated him from the consequences of his actions until it was too late. "The hardest thing to accept," he said, "is that you were right about everything. My department was underperforming. I was a poor leader. I did let my ego override my professionalism. Instead of asking how I could improve, I tried to destroy the messenger." I found myself genuinely impressed by his self-awareness, though I remained cautious about his motivations. "What do you want to do with these insights, Blake?" "I want to rebuild, but I want to do it the right way. I've been volunteering with a nonprofit that helps people develop job skills. I am teaching basic computer literacy to adults who are re-entering the workforce. It's humbling work, but it's also the first time in years that I feel like I'm actually helping people instead of just trying to advance my own career." He paused, stirring his coffee nervously. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to write a letter of recommendation. Not for my technical skills or my previous work, but for the volunteer work I'm doing now. I think it would mean something coming from you." The request caught me off guard. A year ago, Blake Morrison had tried to destroy my credibility in front of Sterling Industries' executive team. Now he was asking me to vouch for his character. But as I looked at him across the table, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine humility and authentic remorse. "Blake, I'd be willing to write a letter about your volunteer work, but only if I can verify it independently. I'll need to speak with the nonprofit director and see your commitment for myself. Of course, I understand. I wouldn't expect you to take my word for anything at this point." 3 weeks later, after visiting the Literacy Center and speaking with the program director, I wrote a carefully worded letter describing Blake's dedication to helping others develop professional skills. It wasn't a blanket endorsement of his character, but it was an honest assessment of his efforts to rebuild through service to others. 6 months after that meeting, Blake found employment with a small marketing firm specializing in nonprofit organizations. His salary was a fraction of what he'd earned at Sterling Industries, but according to Jasmine, who had maintained minimal contact with him despite their broken engagement, he seemed genuinely happy with the work. The most meaningful moment came a year later, when I received an invitation to speak at the regional conference on workplace ethics. As I walked into the convention center, I was surprised to see Blake in the audience. He approached me during the networking break. "Catalina, I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to start over. The letter you wrote helped me get my current job, but more importantly, the way you handled our entire situation taught me what professionalism actually looks like." He handed me a business card. "Blake Morrison, Client Relations Specialist, Community Impact Marketing. I'm working with organizations that help people develop job skills and advance their careers. In a way, I'm doing my small part to support the same principles your Catalyst initiative promotes." As I looked at his card, I realized that this was perhaps the most satisfying resolution possible. Not Blake's destruction, but his transformation. Not his continued failure, but his eventual understanding of the values he had once dismissed. "I'm glad you found your way, Blake. It sounds like you're doing important work." "I am,
And I learned something from watching you build the Catalyst Initiative. Real leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about creating opportunities for people to discover their own power. Driving home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. What started with a simple text asking for a ride home from my husband's funeral had somehow led to a career transformation, a statewide talent development program, and now the rehabilitation of the person who had tried to derail it all. Blake Morrison had called me pathetic for living in a studio apartment and working at a reception desk. Now I was running a program that was changing lives across 5 counties, speaking at conferences about workplace leadership, and had just been offered a position with the State Business Development Council that would expand the Catalyst Initiative statewide.
But perhaps more importantly, I had learned that dignity and professionalism weren't just strategies for handling conflict. They were principles that could transform entire cultures, rebuild broken people, and create opportunities where none had existed before. Some stories end with victory, others end with revenge. The best stories end with transformation, not just of the protagonist, but of everyone touched by their journey. As I pulled into the driveway of my new house in Riverside Heights, a neighborhood that Blake Morrison had once suggested was beyond my reach, I smiled at the thought that sometimes the greatest power comes not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them become better than they were when they were your enemies. Blake Morrison had once asked what I had to show for my 28 years. Now I had an answer. The ability to turn condescension into opportunity, insults into insights, and personal attacks into platforms for positive change. That pathetic girl from the studio apartment had built something that would outlast any title, any salary, and any recognition. She had built a legacy of lifting others up instead of tearing them down. And she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.